I want to pick up that same theme with Bill Barr, of course, the former U.S. Attorney General. One Damn Thing After Another, Memoirs of an Attorney General. It really is a great book, and he's not afraid to zing himself in that. It's always a pleasure to have him. Attorney General, very good to see you. Let me ask you a little bit about a point I was raising with the Congresswoman, and that is whether you believe these hearings are justified or trumped up, no pun intended, against the former president. It's likely in a couple of weeks they will seek criminal indictments to key players, maybe even the former president himself. How do you feel about that?
Well, I haven't seen anything that makes me think the president committed a crime. What's come out so far has generally been known before. There are a few things that were new. But I do think there are legitimate areas of inquiry, but I also agree with the Congresswoman that this isn't set up as an optimal mechanism for getting at the truth, and there is obviously a big political overlay. But, you know, I think it's legitimate to explore whether or not there was a plan to use violence to stop the vote. And if there was a plan, was the president involved? I haven't seen anything up to now that makes me think he was, and I personally doubt it. But I think those are legitimate questions. And the other question is more of a political nature, which is, you know, did the president stand by for hours while the Capitol was under attack and did nothing and made the comments that were attributed to him about the vice president? I think that's a legitimate area of inquiry.
All right, Attorney General, you know, you have your comments to that committee. I don't know if they came back to haunt you, but they were replayed to remind the world that you had not agreed with President Trump at the time that the election was rigged. I just want to replay this testimony for those who might have missed that. This is from your remarks to the committee.
I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen. I didn't want to be a part of it.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
Now, as you know, Attorney General, President Trump responded to that, saying of his daughter, Ivanka Trump was not involved in looking at or studying the election results. She had long since checked out and was, in my opinion, only trying to be respectful to Bill Barr and his position as Attorney General. By the way, he added in parentheses that he sucked, referring to you. What did you think of that?
Well, I considered the source. I sort of ignored those kinds of comments. But, you know, that wasn't new, Neil. I think people should understand that on December 1st, I made a public statement through Associated Press.
No, I remember quite well. You're right. It wasn't new. But yeah, a lot of people, like, it sort of re-stirred up the whole thing.
Yeah, and just to remind people, though, on December 22nd, before I left the department, I had a press conference, and I made the same point. And then I obviously went over some of the details of my thinking in my book. So it wasn't new, but I think, you know, the president's response is something I would expect from him, which is essentially ad hominem attacks.
So if he were to judge running again for president, do you think these hearings, prime time or otherwise, there are a few more, I don't believe any more in prime time, could dissuade him of that or should dissuade him of that?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's going to dissuade him of it. I think, you know, he'll make his decision, and I think he probably right now intends to run. But as I've said before, there's a lot can happen in 3 years, and part of it are 2.5 years, and a lot of it could involve this episode and facts that come out about it. I think I said at the time, I said on January 6th, that I thought his behavior was shameful. Not because I felt he legally incited the riots, but I thought he was largely responsible for directing those people up to the Hill with the idea that there was something that could be done to turn things around and to stop the steal.
Now, he still feels that way. Many others, including apparently his daughter, don't feel the same way. Where do you think this whole thing goes, Attorney General? I mean, we talk about whether Democrats could succeed in filing criminal charges and all of that, but where realistically do you think all this goes?
Well, first, I think the Justice Department will make its own decision. I don't think they will be influenced by what's going on the Hill or pushed to do something. I think the department would want to have real smoking gun evidence of complicity in a plan to use force to stop the count before it went after a sitting president, a former president of the United States. So I think that's, to me, unlikely unless there's some real smoking gun evidence that is produced. I think the net effect of it will be political, and I think it could hurt the president a little bit on the margin, but I think people have generally picked what team they're on as regards President Trump, and this may not really have that much of an effect overall.
All right. Attorney General, thank you very, very much. One Damn Thing After Another is the book. He kind of spells it out, his whole experience in the White House. But it is a fast read, very, very good read for Father's Day and fathers who don't necessarily get into the political stuff. He goes way beyond the political stuff. Very good book. Very smart fellow.